And so now it's actually truly my pleasure to announce our next speaker. His topic is cigarettes for 6-year-olds, and I know I'm interested to find out what that's all about too. Many of you know him. His name is Stephen Knowles. Stephen is the president of Group Mustang. He has over 25 years of broad experience managing and executing all phases of domestic and international oil and gas projects. He joined Mustang in 1990, and prior to becoming the president in 2006, he served in numerous roles providing engineering, design, and project management services for global clients. He has a BS in mechanical engineering from Texas A&M, and he overcome that and still got registered as a professional engineer in the state of Texas. He's also a graduate of Harvard University Executive Management Program. With that, please join me in welcoming Steve.
And yet still even more to overcome. Thanks, Glenn. Always something. So when I got invited to do this, I'm thinking about what I'm going to talk about. And so I'll share the quick headline with you. What I want to talk about is actually much in the vein of what Glenn just talked to us about. And somehow we're going to put that under the banner of cigarettes for 6-year-olds. And then I want to talk a little bit about some of the initiatives that I see at CII now, and maybe a couple of initiatives that might be appropriate for CII in the future, but to get a little bit of a view of how I see Group Mustang interfacing with CII. So cigarettes for 6-year-olds. I was sitting on an airplane flight, a United flight, looking at the Hemisphere magazine after Wayne had talked about this, and I came across this ad and I started laughing, and I thought, gee, that's actually kind of funny and sad at the same time. And the article talked about the progression of some of the advertising. It was really an article about advertising. Some of you may have seen it. What we have here is Dr. Batty, circa 19th century, late 1800s. And what it says is the temporary relief of asthma, hay fever, foul breath. So how bad was that at the beginning? Diseases of the throat, head colds, canker sores, and bronchial irritations. It even has that little disclaimer there that says, for your health. And then, much like the Surgeon General, a little warning. Not recommended for children under the age of 6. So cigarettes for 6-year-olds. But as I looked at that, I thought, things do happen. If Dr. Batty, let's say, was a competent physician of his day, and now we look back on it and kind of chuckle and laugh. But let's also assume that somewhere in there, somebody knew, somebody was seeing the early warning signs. There were other opinions besides Dr. Batty's that maybe there were some issues there. And I got to thinking about, okay, well, if we look to how are we going to address these issues, and I thought, you know what? If we look to the movies, they've got some answers for us. So this is our friend the Terminator and some of his buddies. So in the future, maybe we can send a robot back to correct some of these problems in the past. And for those of us who are the do-it-yourselfers, we'll build a time machine and get in it and go back and take care of some of these issues in the past. And then I got to thinking again about CII, and I thought, maybe at 2083 conference, research team 10,000 and change, under that same theme of project development certainty, we'll have time machine development. And the way that's going to work is cost, budget, and schedule to be filled in upon delivery. But enough about time travel. CII is here, as we just heard from Glenn, about research, about improving the industry that we all practice in. It is about trying to establish those best practices. It is about a common base of sharing and learning. And until time travel, it really is the best way we have to prevent those things from happening that we know are very real, whether they're cost, budget, schedule, safety, all of those things that we try to work on in project delivery. And I want to talk a little bit about how Group Mustang over the years has kind of participated with CII, tried to drive the benefit that we heard Glenn talking about, those benefits that are there. And so to do that, I'm going to take just a quick moment or two, a couple of slides, to talk about Wood Group Mustang and how it's shaped and where we are today so that there's some context as we talk about how we work with CII. So to talk about the Wood Group Mustang, just a quick snapshot of the Wood Group, our parent company, a $7 billion concern headquartered Aberdeen in Scotland, 43,000 people worldwide, operations in 50 countries. The Wood Group is set up into 3 divisions. You can see the engineering division where Wood Group Mustang sits, Wood Group PSN, which is an operation and maintenance division, and then the gas turbine services, which is an alternative to the OEM machines for large rotating equipment. When we talk about Wood Group, one of the things that we talk a lot about, as many of you do as well, is values. And so these are our values. This is how we present those values. With safety and assurance as the only one that really is a priority. It sits at top as it should. And what I like about these values is the way that they're presented as integrity is sort of the bookend to safety. Between safety and integrity, the rest of those in the middle can exist. And the thing I really like about the way these values are presented is it puts people right in the middle. So Wood Group Mustang has very little assets, a few computers, a bunch of desks, some chairs. We're a people company. That is our asset. And they vote with their feet, and every day we're thrilled when everybody shows back up to work to do another day's service. So people right there in the middle. As we talk about people, now kind of looking back at the Wood Group Mustang world, as Mustangers, we've always had a slogan, people-oriented, project-driven. And the project-driven piece is kind of self-explanatory. I think everybody in the room can understand that. We are all, to a large degree, project-driven. So the question is, well, how do you explain the people-oriented? What does that people-oriented thing mean at Mustang? And so I grabbed a couple of photos because I was trying to think, how can I explain in a quick sentence just a bit of a light into our culture? And yes, that is a 7-foot blue furry mascot of a Mustang that we call Blue. And Blue has a habit of showing up all over the place. And perhaps some of the clients here have seen Blue at some of our client activities. So when you talk about culture and you talk about values, to me they mix very quickly. Culture and values and culture, they go hand in hand. I think that all of us are constantly working within our project teams, within our companies, certainly within our industry at large. How do we create the right values? How do we develop a culture that leads to performance? And in that respect, we do the same. So looking at Mustang itself, we started in the late 80s. This is a picture that probably goes back to the 60s, but I liked it because when I started at Mustang, that's what our drafting room looked like. The technology hadn't changed very much, and that was about the size of our entire drafting room. And so from those beginnings in the early 80s to today, where technology has become such an important part of the delivery tools, we now have Mustangers working far afield and home office, working on projects. Headcount kind of looks like this. We started this graph in 2000. That's when we were acquired by the Wood Group. From there, from about 1,000 people, where today we sit at about 8,000 folks operating 5 hubs, 5 different countries, projects all around the world. And looking at those projects, again, our start was in the offshore business. This is a Transco Energy TEPCO platform on the shelf of the Gulf of Mexico. And from that sort of late 80s time period, we've had the opportunity to be involved in really world-class projects spanning the oil and gas delivery chain and now even broadening out into some of the industrial and manufacturing spheres. So these are the industries that we serve. And again, it's a good fit for us here at CII, from onshore, refining and chemicals, manufacturing, industrial, automation control, renewable energy, pipeline, heavy oil, onshore, and LNG. So Again, the CII, as it's grown, Mustang has kind of grown with it. And so with that background then, I think we can take just a quick look at what has been the driver through that process. And so for us, something that I think does translate is kind of the business model. So this is a very simple circle. People with a passion perform. If we do that well, we'll make a profit, and that provides more people that can go to work. So the leadership at Wood Group Mustang, I can say for myself, I can speak for those that I interface with regularly, we're a growth company. It's about creating good jobs for folks who are willing to do that good work. So people with a passion perform. And as I go through the rest of my talk, I want to clue into that passion piece. Because I think for me, that's really what makes the difference. Passion. Whether that passion is large or small, in the detail or the big picture, passion becomes a real piece. And just like we have blue as a mascot, it really is kind of fun and silly and even a little bit weird at times. But it is about engagement. It is about getting people to see that this is larger than just the data sheets or perhaps the inspection that they're doing on that day. So people with a passion. And with that context, we can take a look at Wood Group Mustang and how we interface with CII. So we obviously have folks that go into the research teams and workshops, supply a lot of data into the metrics. And as Glenn rightly said, it's a leadership opportunity for many of our folks to try leadership on a different level. What do we get out of that? Best practices, lots of process improvements, professional development, as we talked about those leadership skills, and relationships, a very key part of what goes on here at CII. But I'm going to park on the tactical. You saw the growth curve from 1,000 to 8,000 and the projects from sort of a geographically simple solution to more of a global approach. And one of our challenges has been, how do we assure the quality of what we deliver? Many of the folks in this room have the same challenges. We see the CII research teams on this. For us, CII became one of those core building blocks, the best practices, as we put together what we call baseline today. As we started to put that together, rather than start with a blank sheet of paper, we would start with the CII best practices. If we had practices in place, we then benchmarked those against the CII best practices. So we have been able to literally jumpstart to mind to make great leaps as we look at what our baseline and standards are for the services that we perform across EPCM by using the CII best practices. So along with all those intangible things, those are dollars saved, and I think a quality level achieved that otherwise we would have really struggled over the years to recreate. And so with that, I'm going to take a little bit of a break there, and we're going to look at some of the initiatives that CII is working on today. And the first one that I'd like to talk about is that project delivery piece. I've been coming to CII conferences for about 6, 7, 8 years, and every year there are sessions on some aspect of project delivery. This week we're talking about project certainty. We're talking about work packaging. How can we create the projects to work? This is a picture of the Boeing manufacturing facility for the 787 Dreamliner. The project was declared a huge success, on schedule, on budget, an enviable safety record. The Dreamliner itself I won't comment on other than to say I was on one last week. It's a beautiful aircraft. But all of us start off on a project wanting to be the folks in that picture. We start off a project and everybody on the job wants to have a successful project. We want to achieve the cost and the schedule that we've set out to do. We want to make the innovations that we know we need on these particular projects. Each one of them comes with their own set of challenges, and everybody wants to rise to meet them. We want to be the folks in that picture standing in front of a successful piece of work. And so what happens? And no, I'm not going to put one of our examples and never an example of a client, because I like my job. But we can all relate to this in our project work, whether it's a security camera behind a signage or a driveway that's not navigable. So something happens between that initial desire and then the outcomes of these projects that we all face and fight, and many of us in this room are trying to solve those issues today. And that's the real power of the joint learning of CII, is we can get together because we are all facing many of the same challenges. And again, that collective wisdom is greater than any one of us. And so the best practices, the research teams, all focused on project delivery, I think is right, and one that will take different forms as we go forward, but we'll continue to look at as part of CII. The other piece I want to comment on is the knowledge transfer. And maybe a couple of perspectives that might be a little different from what I observed. So for many, not a new fact, but what you see represented here are 5 generations in the workplace. The traditionalists, the baby boomers, X, Y, and now entering the workforce, the millennials. This is the first time in history that we've had that generational span in the workforce, and that causes a lot of problems. And I'll touch on a couple of observations there here in a minute. But what I really want to talk about is the retirement cliff. I guess when I first came into this job in 2006, that was one of the first issues that we raised as a risk analysis within our company, was the retirement cliff. I will say that according to the retirement cliff, half of our folks are gone today, and they're not. About 2 weeks ago, I had a great interchange. One of our guys, we were talking in the hallway, one of our senior guys, and he said, "Steve, why does everybody keep talking to me like I'm about to die?" I said, "I don't know, what's wrong with you?" He said, "No." He said, "We need to know what's in your brain. We need to get that out as quickly as possible and transfer it to this next generation." And he's like, "Well, then just come by my office. I'm going to be here." Our life expectancy is longer. We, as a group, are working longer. Why do we have 5 generations in the workplace? Because we're working longer. So I don't see the retirement cliff. It's just not what I'm experiencing as looking across this group. What we are seeing is a slope there. Yes, folks will retire, and they'll do it when they're darn good and ready. And some of them retire and decide that was fun and come back and give it another go. What all of that says is we have time. Rather than a retirement cliff, we actually have time to do things right. We have time, we really have time to go through and see what makes sense as we talk to those traditionalists and those baby boomers and some of the go-getters and the X's that want to retire early. What would be right for you? And just as there's many people in the room, there's that many solutions as to how this knowledge transfer can work. And so yes, we've got programs, and yes, we can do the mentoring, and there's lots of ways to go about it. We need to continue to find more, but we have time. So my observation has been we should get used to working with 5 generations in the workforce. While that's the first time it's ever happened, the expectation is it's going to be going on for a while. This could be my living room. And I didn't understand what was going on here. So I picked this picture because it reflected a conversation I actually had with my daughter a few years ago. A bunch of her friends had come over. They're sitting literally in my living room. That's not them, by the way, but could have been. And afterwards, I asked Allison, I said, "Well, I don't get it. What's the point of everybody coming over to somebody's house to hang out? And then, you talk a little bit, but mostly you guys are just on the phone, Facebook, IMing, texting, tweeting, whatever it is you do. Why aren't you guys talking to each other?" And she looked at me like I had 2 heads and said, "We are." This was an acceptable form of communication. They're talking to each other and others in the living room via the phone. And so as we talk about the multi-generational challenges, in the workplace it's a little harder to extrapolate this, But I would bet, and I will also admit, that I have been in a meeting and sent a text to somebody in the meeting about either something related, unrelated, or something I thought was funny. But we kind of are doing this ourselves, even from my generation. So the communication paths will take a number of different routes. But I think the main message here is that we communicate, that we do take time out, again, maybe not over the smartphones, but to communicate with the younger folks. And as I look at the generation that we have coming into Wood Group Mustang, again, one little slice of the pie, but my observation is this. These folks are well educated. Aside from my humble beginnings, Glenn, these folks are highly educated compared to when we started. These folks are much more globally aware than I was when I started and my peers when we started in Lafayette, Louisiana. And these folks understand competition in a way that I think took most of us quite a while to understand. These folks will send in applications by the hundreds, if not thousands, for an unpaid internship. They understand competition. Excuse me. So when they show up to the workplace, sure, there's the exceptions. There are some of those classic behaviors that we read about. But by and large, these folks, they're ready to go to work. They don't know what that means entirely. Neither did we when we started, but they're ready to go to work. And so as I get a chance to talk to them, they want to understand about data sheets. They want to understand about how we do process workflows. They want to understand what's happening at construction sites. But I think there's an opportunity for us to have a deeper conversation. And it's around that passion piece. And so one of the things that I typically get into a conversation around is passion. And so for me, my story, real quickly, is I always wanted to be in the oil and gas business because it's so dynamic. And I felt like the world would always need energy and therefore probably would be a good job. But it all came clear to me when I was traveling through Nigeria, about 20 minutes, no more than 30 minutes outside of Port Harcourt. And the guide we were with, our partner we were working with, was talking about the light. And he said, some of the villages have the light and other villages don't have the light. And as we were driving down the road, he kept pointing out the window saying, the light goes this way and the light goes this way, and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It's broad daylight. Realized he was talking about the power poles and the power lines. And we turned down a dirt road as he was taking me to his village. And as we turned down the dirt road, he said, the light stops right here. And the power line was on a big spool, coiled. That's where it stopped. And it hadn't stopped that day because the grass had grown around it, and you could tell it had been there for a while. And that's where the light stopped. As we went into his village, we met some of the other folks there, and again, it was just to kind of help me get an understanding of Nigeria and the business practices and a bit of the culture. It was a fascinating discussion about why the light stopped there, but that concept kept coming back to me about the light, about what a difference that would make, and about how the euphemism of the light, which we use for a lot of different things, stops right here. And it just suddenly kind of dawned on me that what we do is we do work to provide light, whether the absolute comparison to the electricity, or whether that's in job creation or knowledge transfer of sharing what we know so the next generation can do even better. What we do is around sharing that light. And as I talk to younger folks about this, I used to say, and so I think what you need to do is find your passion, and that's where you see the disconnect. So what I would offer is, rather than to give them the challenge to go find their passion, what I find is really fascinating is that when you share your passion, they actually have a guidepost to connect to. And 2 or 3 or 4 of those conversations, and that helps these folks get clear. So part of that transfer is not just knowledge, but the why do you do what you do? The passion. Why do you do what you do? And I would submit that everybody in this room works hard, has spent a career, comes to conferences like this, works for improvement because they have a passion for what they do. Somewhere in the detail or the big picture, there is a passion. Because without that passion, light goes out. And we know what that looks like too. It's a darker and scarier place. So as you interface with the younger folks, as younger folks interface with us, yes, it's good to know the details, but share that passion about why you do what you do, because I think that's important. So we've looked at a couple of things that CII is engaged with, and I'd like to finish up here to talk about a couple of things that I see coming that we might be appropriate for this group. The first one is cybersecurity. Now, I am not a cybersecurity expert, don't claim to be, not sure I want to be. It's kind of a scary place. But certainly we all read what's going on out there, and we know that there is a huge issue around cybersecurity. But just for a little bit of a glimpse into some systems, I wanted to share some data about what is happening in the Wood Group Mustang world, and I think it'll surprise you. It certainly did me. So this is 2012 data on our network. We received 168 million emails a year. If you drop down to that bottom bullet, which I know you speed readers already have, only 12% of the emails come through to users. So what is all of those millions of emails that aren't getting to users? Because we're going to have to take the case that the emails that the users need, they are getting, or our IT departments would have all sorts of rants happening upon them. What's being blocked? 150 emails, 150 million emails last year blocked in our filters. The firewall blocks everything that's encrypted, blacklisted, or offensive. So encrypted is anything we can't read, doesn't come through. Blacklisted and offensive, third party, we subscribe to services that help identify those things that are not appropriate for businesses, and so those are blocked. 127 million emails blocked. Another 12 million in spam. We all know about spam. Again, subscribe to a service, try to hold out the spam. And that last one, 11 million emails with known viruses. Now, some of these are relatively small, some of them are old, been floating around for years, rather innocuous, but some of them aren't. And so as I look at the pressure, if you can look at it that way, on just our email system with 8,000 employees at Wood Group Mustang, 88% we don't want. So there's a lot going on there. If we look at the global picture, I just pulled a couple of stats. There's way more than this. 2011, $1 trillion lost in IP theft and network damage. 90% of the companies polled in this particular research reported a breach of their network of some kind. So it's out there, and it's big. If we pull this back to the oil and gas, one of our core markets, Night Dragon, many of you may be familiar with Night Dragon. Through that program, went in to steal gigabytes of highly sensitive material, but look at what it got. Oil and gas field operations, financial transactions, and bidding data. So I think back to our values model. Our world of owners, suppliers, and contractors works off a base that we have a level playing field, that there is some integrity in the systems that we use. We all know what happens when that integrity is compromised. The bidding process gets ugly. Here is a third-party group that's doing us no favors, that is, among other things, looking for bid data to take the integrity to unlevel that playing field. And that's a scary thought. So is there something here as a Construction Industry Institute? Are there more data that we can get around this rather than the anecdotal data that I've got here? Is there a best practice, a set of best practices or procedures that we can put in play that maintains the integrity of what we do in terms of use of the internet, the transfer of data, and the security of the information that we use to bid and award very important contracts. And then on the note of security, I want to talk about safety. What you see here is the CII industry data, not the CII members, but the industry data, total recordable incident rate starting in 2003 to 2011, and that's some good improvement. Total recordable incident rate focuses, as we know, around personal injury, fatalities, personal lost time, property damage, medical reports. But that's a good story. I mean, that's a 2- or 3-fold improvement, and while one can never rest as long as there's still harm being done, that is something notable, something that I know as an industry we're proud of. It also tells us we can improve and more work to do. But I want to take a bit of a sidestep here. I first saw this in a Taylor Clark presentation a couple of years ago, where the occupational safety represented by the green triangle to the left talks about those pieces. And then the introduction, at least for me, of a larger triangle colored in all sorts of really loud orange, red, yellows that kind of mean fire. And in that big triangle, not because it's more important, but because of the severity of the incident is greater, fire, explosions, toxic releases, fatalities, the big high potential incidents, the significant process safety breaches. And while these two triangles do have some root causes down here at the bottom in common, they have more that are separate. And so as I think about this, we look to our news and events of late, and we can see Macondo, Texas City, recent rail car disaster in Quebec, and then going all the way back in this industry to Piper Alpha. I'm not sure if they're becoming more frequent because we don't have good data on this. I haven't found a source that kind of links these things together, but it feels like it is. I'm not sure that the severity is getting worse, but it feels like it could be. And so if we take the case, A, we need to find out whether those feelings are real, and then B, so we need data, and then B, we need to figure out across the spectrum of these incidents to look at root causes and what are the lessons that we can learn from this, and what are the best practices that we as an industry can pull. Further, I would submit that many of us in this room have a connection to these types of incidents. For me, it's the Piper Alpha. Wood Group lost 36 lives in Piper Alpha when it burned. And I've been able to talk to some of the folks that were around back then that dealt with the families and all of the issues and the Cullen report, and just time after time, the reviews of the incident. And when you look in their eyes and when you talk to them, you're left with one very clear thing. Somebody knew that there were issues. Not that this would happen, but it was a struggle. And you're left with a sense of, what else should we be doing? What else can we do to prevent these? And so I'll leave that at this point, but to say, is this something that CII, we as an industry, we need to respond to this so that we can all assure ourselves that we are using the very best practices to mitigate, prevent these type of calamities. But these are not new. That was a big, heavy picture there. This is where you take a deep breath. They're not new. This is the Titanic before the voyage. Moving forward a little bit, somebody thought this was a good idea. This is the lunch break, where you kind of kick back, get ready for the afternoon. That's where they're most comfortable. Okay, so many issues with that picture. How many of us had a Ford Pinto? I know my family did for a short period of time. Asbestos remediation continues to be an issue. Right up to 2003. 2003, we all knew the dangers of lead paint. But these Thomas the Tank engines, about 500,000 of these were sent around the world covered in a lead-based paint. So whether it's our industry or others, whatever industry we're working in, these types of broad issues are out there for us. And I will just conclude with the thought circling back, are we doing everything we can with the tools that we have available so that we don't end up on some slideshow in the future as something that seems comical because it was just that foolish? And so with that, I'll take questions.